Racist bankers kick out a black old man, unaware he is their boss. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the lobby of Crestwood National Bank was bustling with activity. Employees in sharp suits moved briskly behind polished counters, while customers, some impatient, others simply passing time, waited in line. Among them was James, an elderly black man with a weathered face and a kind smile. His neatly pressed suit was simple, yet dignified, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it had seen years of use. James walked with a deliberate pace, his cane tapping softly against the marble floors. As James approached the counter, the room seemed to shift slightly. Two employees, Laura and Brian, both in their early 40s, exchanged a glance. Their polished demeanor faltered just slightly, and a subtle frown crept onto Laura's face. "Can I help you?" Laura asked, her tone clipped. James stepped forward, his smile polite but firm. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I'd like some assistance with my account." Brian, who was standing nearby, leaned in and whispered something to Laura, barely audible to the other customers. "Another one of those time-wasters," he muttered under his breath. Laura sighed loudly, her impatience visible as she eyed James up and down. "Do you even have an account here?" she asked, her words dripping with condescension. James remained calm, his smile unwavering. "Yes, ma'am, I do. I've been a customer here for over 25 years. Laura raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Well, we'll need to see some ID." James reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, handing over his identification with steady hands. Laura took it and squinted at it, her expression remaining dubious. "You sure this is your account?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Brian interjected, stepping closer. "We've had some incidents before," he said, his voice low but sharp. James raised an eyebrow, but his voice remained calm. "I'm certain, young man, I've been banking here since before you started working." The subtle insult didn't sit well with Brian. He scoffed and muttered, "Some people think they can just walk in here and waste our time." Laura, emboldened by Brian's attitude, pushed the ID back across the counter. "Look, sir, we're very busy today. Maybe you should come back when you're more prepared." James's expression remained composed, though a flicker of disappointment passed through his eyes. "I am prepared," he said softly. "I'd appreciate it if you could check my account." Instead of responding, Laura motioned to a security guard standing near the entrance. The guard, a burly man with a stern face, walked over, his presence adding an unnecessary layer of intimidation. "Is there a problem here?" the guard asked, his voice firm. "No problem," James said evenly. "I'm just trying to access my account." Laura leaned over and whispered something to the guard, who nodded curtly. "Sir, I think it's best if you leave for today," the guard said, gesturing toward the door. James stood still for a moment, his grip tightening slightly on his cane. The room seemed to grow quieter as other customers took notice of the scene. Without raising his voice, James replied, "Are you asking me to leave without resolving my business here?" "Yes," Laura said bluntly. "You're holding up the line." James looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady but unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and began to walk toward the exit, his cane tapping softly once again. The door closed behind him, leaving the employees to resume their work, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. A few weeks later, James returned to the bank. This time, it was late afternoon, and the bank was bustling with activity. Customers lined up at the counters, while bankers in sharp suits moved briskly from one desk to another, attending to clients or making phone calls. James patiently approached the reception desk, where a young man in his late 20s sat scrolling through his phone. His name tag read Ryan. Without looking up, Ryan gestured dismissively and said, "Yes, what do you need?" James offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I was wondering if I could speak to someone about opening a corporate account. I have some business matters to discuss." Ryan finally looked up, his expression immediately turning cold. He scanned James's appearance, the slightly worn coat, the old-fashioned hat, the absence of a briefcase or luxury watch, and his face twisted into a smirk. "Corporate account? You sure you're in the right place, sir?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. James didn't let the jab faze him. "Yes, I'm sure. I'd like to speak to a manager if possible." Before Ryan could respond, a second employee, a woman named Emily, walked by and overheard the conversation. She glanced at James, then leaned in to whisper to Ryan, "Does he look like someone who could even afford a corporate account? Probably just wasting our time." James caught the remark but chose to remain composed. He repeated his request, this time addressing both of them. "I'd appreciate it if someone could assist me. I have all the necessary documents with me." Ryan exchanged a glance with Emily, rolling his eyes. "Look, sir, this is a high-end financial institution. We don't have time for whatever it is you're trying to do here." The sharpness in Ryan's tone drew the attention of other customers and staff nearby. Some whispered among themselves while others looked visibly uncomfortable. Emily decided to escalate the situation. She stepped forward, her voice firm but condescending. "Sir, we have policies in place. Without an appointment and proper credentials, we can't entertain requests like yours, and frankly, this branch handles clients of a certain caliber." The words stung, but James maintained his composure. "I understand policies, and I respect them. However, I believe if you take a moment to review my paperwork, you'll see that I meet the requirements." Emily let out a short laugh. "Paperwork? You're kidding, right? Sir, I think it's best if you take your business elsewhere. We're quite busy here." By now, a small crowd had formed. Some customers stared in disbelief at the way James was being treated, while others averted their gaze, unwilling to intervene. A middle-aged woman whispered to her companion, "Why are they treating him like that? He hasn't done anything wrong." Ryan, sensing the growing tension, decided to end the interaction. "All right, that's enough," he said loudly. "Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting the workflow here." James hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers. His calm demeanor never wavered, but there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded document. "Perhaps if you look at this, it might clear up any misunderstandings." Ryan barely glanced at the paper before pushing it back toward James. "I said leave. We don't have time for this." Emily nodded in agreement, stepping closer to James as if to physically usher him out. "You heard him. This isn't the place for you." At that moment, a third employee, a junior banker named Olivia, stepped forward hesitantly. She had been watching the interaction from her desk and felt increasingly uncomfortable with how things were unfolding. "Maybe we should just take a look at his documents," Olivia said softly, addressing Ryan and Emily. "It won't hurt to check." Ryan shot her a glare. "Olivia, stay out of this. We know what we're doing." But Olivia persisted, her voice firmer this time. "He's not causing any trouble. He's just asking for assistance. Isn't that our job?" Emily turned to Olivia, her tone icy. "Olivia, if you want to waste your time, go ahead, but don't expect us to entertain every random walk-in who thinks they can open a corporate account." The tension in the room was palpable. James, sensing the hostility, decided to step back. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll take my business elsewhere." He turned to leave, his steps slow but dignified. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment, glancing back at the staff who had dismissed him so quickly. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet sadness. Without another word, he walked out into the cold afternoon, leaving the murmurs of the onlookers behind. Back inside, Ryan and Emily exchanged smug smiles, proud of how they had handled the situation. People like him think they can just walk in and demand attention. Ryan muttered under his breath. Olivia, however, felt a knot of unease in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. The weeks following James's decision to enroll Ryan and Emily in anti-racism therapy were a whirlwind of introspection, education, and transformation. At first, both employees approached the mandated therapy sessions with reluctance and skepticism. They saw it as an unnecessary punishment, a humiliation in front of their peers. But James, with his calm and steady demeanor, had anticipated this reaction. "I'm not punishing you," he had said the day he handed them their notices of mandatory participation. "This is an opportunity, a chance for you to see the world through a lens you've been avoiding. It's not about shaming you. It's about expanding your mind and heart." Emily couldn't get those words out of her head during the first session. She had always seen herself as someone who treated everyone the same, but the sessions challenged her to confront her biases. The therapy was structured to push participants out of their comfort zones, starting with storytelling sessions where people of different racial and cultural backgrounds shared their lived experiences. One afternoon, during a particularly powerful session, a young black woman named Danielle spoke about a time she was refused a home loan despite having impeccable credit. Her voice trembled as she recounted how the denial had crushed her dreams of owning her first home. "It wasn't just about the loan," Danielle said. "It was about being told, in so many words, that I wasn't good enough, that no matter how hard I worked, someone would always see me as less." Emily found herself wiping away tears for the first time. She truly understood how the systems she had upheld, consciously or not, could devastate lives. She thought back to the way she had treated James. Though she hadn't said anything overtly racist, her actions had spoken volumes. She had dismissed him as unworthy of her respect based solely on his appearance. Ryan's journey was no less impactful. His natural defensiveness made the first few sessions difficult. He was quick to interrupt, to justify his actions, to point out times when he believed he had been fair to everyone. But as the sessions progressed, his walls began to crumble. One day, the therapist asked the group to participate in a role reversal exercise. Ryan was paired with a black man named Marcus, who played the role of a banker, while Ryan acted as the customer. Marcus treated Ryan with the same coldness and disdain that Ryan had often shown to others, adding an air of condescension that hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. "That's what it feels like," Marcus said afterward, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "That's what so many of us feel every day, like we're less than, just because of the color of our skin." Ryan couldn't speak. For the first time, he felt the sting of prejudice, even if only in a simulated environment. It was a wake-up call he couldn't ignore. Over the next several weeks, Emily and Ryan began to change. Not just in how they viewed the world, but in how they saw themselves. They started to recognize their privilege, their blind spots, and the harm they had caused, both intentionally and unintentionally. The therapy sessions were difficult and often uncomfortable, but they were also deeply transformative. James, though not directly involved in the sessions, kept tabs on their progress. He received weekly reports from the program's facilitators and even attended a few group sessions as a silent observer. Seeing Emily and Ryan's vulnerability and willingness to change filled him with a sense of cautious hope. When the therapy program concluded, Emily and Ryan requested a private meeting with James. They walked into his office, their postures humble, their expressions earnest. "Mr. Carter," Emily began, her voice trembling, "we owe you an apology, not just for how we treated you that day, but for the attitudes and biases we've carried for so long. The therapy opened our eyes to things we didn't want to see about ourselves. We were wrong, so wrong, and we're so sorry." Ryan nodded, his usually confident demeanor replaced with genuine humility. "I thought I understood people, but I didn't. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and worse, I justified it to myself. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when you had every reason to." James looked at them for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with a small smile, he said, "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, but the real work begins now. Change isn't about words, it's about actions. Show me and yourselves that you've learned from this." Emily and Ryan nodded, their resolve evident. Several months later, James decided to host a small gathering at the bank to celebrate the progress Emily and Ryan had made. It was a simple affair, just a few employees, some snacks, and a chance to reflect on the journey they had all been a part of. During the gathering, Emily and Ryan shared their experiences with the group, speaking openly about their past mistakes and the lessons they had learned. Their vulnerability inspired others in the room to reflect on their own biases and behaviors, sparking a candid and meaningful conversation about diversity and inclusion. James watched with pride as his employees engaged in the discussion, their words filled with empathy and a genuine desire to create a more inclusive workplace. It was a far cry from the hostility he had faced on his first visit to the bank. Toward the end of the evening, Emily and Ryan approached James. "We wanted to thank you," Emily said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "Not just for giving us a second chance, but for teaching us what leadership really means. You didn't just tell us to change, you showed us how." Ryan added, "You believed in us when we didn't deserve it. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." James smiled, his heart full. "The best way you can thank me is by continuing to grow and by helping others do the same. Change doesn't stop here." The events at the bank became a turning point, not just for Emily and Ryan, but for the entire institution. James implemented new diversity and inclusion training programs, ensuring that all employees, from entry-level staff to top executives, understood the importance of empathy and respect. Emily and Ryan became champions of these initiatives, using their own experiences as a powerful example of how change is possible. They mentored new employees, shared their stories at company events, and worked tirelessly to create a workplace where everyone felt valued. For James, the journey had been about more than just addressing a single incident of discrimination. It had been about planting seeds of change, about showing that even the most deeply ingrained biases could be overcome with humility, education, and a willingness to grow. And in the end, the greatest reward was seeing those seeds bear fruit. A team united by respect, a workplace transformed by understanding, and a legacy of leadership that would endure for years to come.